Hey everyone, welcome to another new session of Tech Athena. For those of you who are new to Tech Athena is a platform where we discuss about new and upcoming technologies. With that, I'm your host Deepthi, and with me is my co-host Shalaka.
Hey, hi everyone, and thank you for watching us on Tech Athena. Thank you so much for being subscribed here and encouraging us to keep talking about new tech topics. We have covered very exotic topics in the recent past and took a break for a while and then started with work from anywhere session, which was very pertinent for COVID-19. And from there on, we are moving into today's topic, which is serverless computing. Dipti, why don't you talk a bit about it?
Okay, we spoke about physical servers, we spoke about high performance computing, then we spoke about cloud. Now, what is serverless? Does that mean there is no physical anymore at all? Uh, or what is the intention behind it? So that's what we are going to discuss today. We'll explain and we'll help you understand what is serverless computing. In fact, to be frank, for a while, even I was researching on it because I was more on the hardware side before. So I used to wonder what is serverless. So now that we came on the cloud side, we actually know a lot more. So with our research, we thought we'll get that to you, and we'll explain you and help you in understanding serverless computing.
Sure. So, without much ado and taking time in the introduction of the topic, let's dive right in, folks.
Yeah.
So, before we really delve into the topic of serverless computing, folks, let us spend some time on understanding how the cloud computing paradigm has evolved over the period of time. We all started with the traditional on-premise IT. Everybody used to own their physical equipment, operating systems, applications, middleware, etc. From there, we moved into a sort of co-hosted, co-located kind of model, and then cloud gave us infrastructure as a service and the platform as a service, and most recently, software as a service kind of uh, paradigms, right? Now,
Yeah.
Dipti, why don't you just talk us through once on what are the
So,
nuances
if
across
you
all
see
of
this
this?
slide, which I have put together, you can see when traditionally started all data center, network storage, physical servers, virtualization, operating system, databases, application, and data, all we used to own ourselves. Then we slowly started outsourcing the data center to if you remember NetMagic, Sifi, they all used to provide data center space to us. Then over a period of time, it went to further extent of network and storage and physical servers hosting. Then after that came the real picture of the cloud has started, where they started taking over virtualization, physical servers, network storage, and data center with IaaS offering. Then to go further ahead and to relieve the burden of the customer from the infrastructure, they started offering PaaS, where customer concentrates only on his business specific application and data, and no more concentrates on the hardware or the operating system. That's where the PaaS offerings. And going forward, customers started telling that we want to concentrate only on our business. uh, I mean, we want our main priority to be business and not IT. We are not a IT company, so we don't want to concentrate. That's how we SaaS offering came in, where customer concentrates completely on the data, even the application is hosted. Right, Shalaka?
Yeah. So you're right, and so just folks for your understanding, what she has really captured very nicely on the screen is everything that is blue here in every model. I think it is managed by the end customer. Everything that is black here is managed by your service provider. That's how you should
So,
look at
Shalaka,
this slide.
okay, so coming to our topic of the day, so where does serverless computing fit here?
Okay, folks. So let me take a stab at explaining how exactly the serverless computing is supposed to work, right? Now, in the application side, we are aware that there is this drive of doing app modernization. And when we say app modernization, we are basically talking about refactoring and re-architecting your application. Instead of this remaining as a mammoth big code, you're breaking it into small services called as microservices. Ideally, we would like the microservices to go and run on a containerized platform. containers are very small virtualized piece of code which run on top of operating systems, right? So basically your ability to run a very small fragment of your application as a microservice gives it a lot of agility, and for the developers lot of flexibility to change the feature set without really touching a big piece of code. At the same time, for an end user to innovate quickly and add new feature functionality based on the need and the changing business asks, etc. Right? So microservices is right now the way to go, and lot of people, I think, lot of new applications are anyway cloud native and microservices built. The older legacy applications, there is an attempt being made on how to convert them into microservices. So look at the small functionalities, right? Here we have captured very specific functionalities of, say, order processing system. So you have a login function, order function, a profile of a customer, the chat with the chatbot, catalog, right? So all of these are different functions. You could potentially build each of them as a microservice. So tomorrow, if you want to change your login function, you could simply change that part of the code.
So Shalaka,
Now moving on. Yeah.
Shalaka, one question before you move on. Does that mean serverless computing runs only on containers?
No. So let me go to the serverless
Yeah.
computing later on, right? Right now I am at microservices, and microservices do not need containers. We are saying there is a better fitment because these are small agile pieces of code, and container gives you agility from the infrastructure perspective. So these two work well together, right? That's what I intended to say. You could run a microservice on a traditional VM or a bare metal if you want, and similarly you could run a mammoth application code on a container if you want. Nothing stops. Okay. Now think about, say, maybe a order processing system which you have probably captured as a microservice. Now even in the order processing there are multiple functions. So a customer might want to look at his receipt. You might want to send an email receipt on completion of a order, maybe, right? Processing of the order. Sometimes customer comes and wants to update his profile. Once an order is placed, you want to schedule the shipment. Have payment handle, you might want to keep changing your gateways, etc. So there are a lot of these smaller functions that even an order processing system runs, right? Now based on your load and the kind of pattern you have with your customers, some of these functions will see heavy load, some of these functions will probably see a lesser load. Some of these functions will take longer because they are complex in processing. Some of these functions are very straightforward, maybe just updating one flag, one field in some database, etc. Right? Now, the functions which are a smaller execution unit, and you think that traditionally they will be invoked less frequently, there is a synergy to run them as serverless. Now, what do I mean by serverless is you can choose not to keep this function running forever on a VM or on a container. Rather, these functions can lay dormant. They are not consuming any computational resources, not even that 1%, 0.1% of your CPU or memory. And on some event, like a customer clicked on an event called as change my profile, or some field change in the database. So there are massive set of events that you could think on, but if on occurrence of an event, you can choose to invoke the function. What do you mean by invoking the function? You want it to load it on some container in some memory, assign the CPU, and then execute the function like any other application code. But you also want to make sure that once that code has executed, it releases all the resources. It releases the container, it releases the memory, and again becomes dormant. And that is why the term serverless is coined, right? These are the functions which do not use any computational resources when they are not in use. So at the end of the day, you get charged. As an end customer, you don't get charged for that 1% or 10% of the CPU that you were using when the code was actually not running, but you are basically getting charged for execution of your function itself, because that is the only time it is consuming any resources. So now with that, like I explained you the concept of serverless, let Dipti take us through how exactly it will work in the paradigm of cloud computing today.
Yes. Yeah.
Dipti, can you just run us
Yeah.
through how do we make this
So,
work?
how does a serverless work? Till now, we understood what is serverless computing. Okay, and Chalaka gave a gist of how the functions are actually spinned into serverless. So, this is a picture that we have put together. One is see on the left hand side, you can see API is being invoked, and then you can see there is authentication, there's database, there's file storage and reporting. So API can talk to all of these, and while the functions that the API is invoking can run on the serverless computing. So you can see their compute functions that I have written there, right? They are actually the serverless computing, where the computing is happening, and the end result are the services that they are serving. If you see on the right hand side, I am showing in detail how a function is being executed. For example, an HTTP request is coming in. It is going to an API gateway. From there, a request is being invoked, or rather, an event is being generated to uh, uh, run a particular service. Okay, and that service can run on different serverless computing. I have kept all the three options that we have, three prime options that we have in the market right now. And on the right side, you can see the custom authorizer, where a function is being authorized by an authorizer. And then once the serverless computing service runs the function, the output goes back as a response, and it gets integrated into further actions, or rather mapped into some other function, and goes back as a HTTP request also. Do you want to add, Chalaka, something?
Yeah, no, I think you captured it well, Deepti. So basically, this is a primary methodology, irrespective of the cloud provider, how you will be able to invoke a function. What Deepti showed is invoking a function via HTTP request, but there may be other
Other ways.
events like change of some object in the storage, or things like that. So there may be, it may be a Kafka event, any event, and there are multiple of those that based on the cloud service provider that you are using, you should be able to register different kinds of events to really invoke, but the flow remains the same.
Yeah. Next slide, Shalaka. So now we understood how a serverless computing works. But now the question is where to use, because there are so many technologies in the market, but the prime thing is, unless you know how to use it, there's no point of a technology there. So with that, we have put together the 6 scenarios which we feel are where the serverless computing actually comes into the picture. Starting with the first one is applications that run infrequently, like some streaming that is happening, or I got, yeah.
Yeah, like for example, in the last example, right, where we talked about order processing, say a customer changing his date of birth, right? It's a very infrequent thing. Most likely, it will never
Yeah.
happen, right? So you could potentially run it as a serverless.
Yes. So I mean, the function is not needed to run all the time. It runs only once in a while. So at that one time it is running, it needs either a high computing or unpredictable computing, right? So that leads to our next point, that is event driven application. To be frank, currently when people actually are starting to adopt serverless computing, the first thing they are actually seeing right now is event driven functions. Most of the market right now is actually seeing event driven functions. Like example, a batch job processing, where a event generates or triggers a function to do the batch processing, or an IoT sensor input, and data transformation functions. What do you say, Shalaka?
Yeah. Yeah. So So you're right. Like for example, even the HTTP request, right? Or even an API call can be treated as an event to that
Yeah.
extent. And most of microservices are API driven. So basically, anything that where a function doesn't have to keep polling anything, but it's more like triggered on an event. I think those are the right functions for you to think about serverless. But again, it has to go back into the main point that Dipti said, that it makes sense commercially probably where the function is running infrequently, uh, because otherwise the cost of you invoking the service every time an event has occurred itself can outweigh the actual benefit. And the second top priority is going to be, I think, the short-livedness of the function. So really the scale of the function execution has to be smaller. You really can't expect to have an hour long or day long batch job running as a serverless.
Yeah, as Shalaka previously told, here you are charged by the execution time of the function. So short-lived and small functions make sense. And then
Yes.
comes the apps that have highly variable or unknown scaling requirement. As I told previously, those apps which you don't know how much compute it requires. Sometimes the compute requirement increases. Like for example, some sudden demand comes in, right? And you have to for particular function you have to increase the compute size. So do you want to spend in buying a new compute, or you want an if you have a service that can expand automatically, and as your function finishes the execution it decreases, or rather it uses normal computing. In a way it saves you money, right? If you go for a service like that, that's where I feel serverless computing comes into the picture. And the another, yeah, Shalaka, you want to add something?
So no. I just wanted to take up the other two examples where one is the app connects to the other services. So basically, anything that is sort of picking up an event from one function or one service and trying to invoke another service, but then after that doesn't come in the control path, right? So any like a traditional service bus kind of functionality, right? If you're trying to create anything like that, which is more like a message broker, that probably is a perfect example for you to create as a serverless computing, given that those connections are infrequently made. And then the last one was, which is more like a limitation at this stage. I would say that the serverless functions are very ephemeral, right? So once they have run their block of computation, they just go away. There is no memory footprint. It doesn't run on the VM anymore. There is no container. So every time it invokes as a new function, and hence you are not able to retain the state of from one call to the function to another call of the function. There is no continuity. So think about serverless as think about it as a stateless, right? You need to be not dependent on state of the last execution of the function in this iteration. If that is how you are writing your function, then also it can be a good candidate. However, folks, there are attempts and there are different ways on how you can pass on the state across function invocations, but that's probably for the later discussion.
So Shalaka, I mean, seeing all these usage of serverless computing, I feel like more and more we are actually moving towards the coding, right? Rather, how the code is written in the application, how the application is being executed. I feel over a period of time, the IT staff that a company is going to have might change, right? Because the thinking process is changing.
Yeah, so it's more like all DevOps, right? So I think eventually the development and operations will integrate and people will think about in terms. So I think this is all going down to the API economy. How many API call for a particular functionality for me to realize at the app level? How many API calls across different services, micro functions, and what is the cost of overall service composition? And then within that, I think people will decide which of the microservices need to run permanently, which of the microservices need to run as functions, and even which of the microservices need to run from which cloud provider. I think it is all about overall API economy to realize a composable service.
So, Shalaka, shall we move to the next slide?
So, now that we have seen how the serverless computing functions and how can you actually realize that using cloud computing, right? So let us look at what are the challenges. Now, the first obvious challenge is you have limited control, and by limited control, what I mean is you now no more control how and which server, which kind of VM this particular function is going to run on, what kind of memory is going to be available there, what kind of compute is going to be available there, right? So you let the moment to decide to run your code as serverless, you are letting go of lot of those controls and prerequisites. However, there is definitely going to be a way to define some of those parameters, as you know, maybe a definition of
Hmm.
your function itself. Uh, but that control is limited as against a very prescribed guidance or prescriptive guidance that as a developer you could give out in terms of your infrastructure
So,
needs.
Shalaka, I mean, we see it might look to some people as limitation, but if you see overall as a business, from a business point of view, uh, infrastructure IT is not your company's job, right? I mean, for example, if I take a finance company, their main job is finance. The main work is finance. So infrastructure, it might look at a limitation, but it's actually not a limitation. It is actually paving a way to you to concentrate more on your actual core business, right?
Depends,
Yeah.
right? So, hence it is going to be a balanced decision to choose on what you run at serverless. As long as you are very grounded in that decision, you don't run your latency hungry, performance hungry kind of codes on serverless, right? Because the first response is probably going to take a more time because it has to really load into the memory, etc. So, as long as you are very diligent about exactly what you are trying to run as functions versus a normal microservice, I think this can actually become a benefit instead of
Hmm.
a limitation.
Limitation. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So going to our next point here, architectural complexity. So yeah, so now everyone is going to or will have to think from the architecture of an application that they're building or the functions that they are writing. So how those functions are going to communicate. So when you go more and more detail, rather more and more minutest, people might end up seeing as a complexity of architecture. But to be frank, it's about. I feel like you will have more control on your architecture, application architecture now than you were before, right?
Yeah, I've seen most of the companies have chosen to do lift and shift as their first wave of cloudification,
Hmm.
right? And there is a reason to it because the moment you get into app modernization, you are really trying to break the code, rewrite it as composable services or microservices, and trying to connect them over, and then again get into an agile DevOps kind of execution paradigm. All of these are tech driven, but they are also process and people driven, and these three things transforming and coming together take time.
Yeah.
Now, this equally applies to serverless. So, really getting into an application and changing it to microservices, and within those microservices choosing which part are actually going to be serverless is definitely a complex task from the design perspective. And I think everybody will need to weigh in on the benefit, right? So unless you are able to create a business justification to put those kind of efforts in, you probably will not get your way
Hmm.
just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah.
And so it is very critical to understand what end outcome are you driving. Are you saying, like for example, a critical mission critical application? Are you saying that for addition of a new functionality, if you were waiting for say 6 months, now you will have to wait for say 6 weeks
6 weeks.
to business, right? So that is the pace of innovation you are trying to
So
bring in,
Shalaka,
or you are saying,
yeah, sorry.
sorry, yeah.
It is just like a cloud, right? When it started, adopting it was difficult. There were lots of challenges. So over a period of time, as things started advancing, or rather uh, going more and more, or businesses advancing, they started seeing cloud as an enabler. Okay, so serverless computing, if you see, it is also in that path of how cloud has come. Today, when remote work came in, right, cloud became priority. So as you go forward, I think more and more when you are trying to outsource your work, or rather decrease the burden or make things easy for you, I think serverless will come in.
Yeah,
It's all
so
context actually.
so there is always going to be a adoption
Yeah,
path,
yeah.
right? So initially you'll find it a bit difficult, then everybody will find too much gung-ho about this thing, and then eventually it will plateau, and we will say, this is our sweet spot.
Correct.
That is a normal adoption cycle for a new technology. But what we are trying to focus on here is there is an additional complexity, because the moment you talk about microservice or a serverless based application versus monolith, there are many moving parts. So you really need a good architectural approach to understand what has to scale, what has to not scale, how these three things have to communicate together, which other part of the businesses can leverage the same microservice, etc., so on and so forth, right? So there is an additional complexity, but I think if you give a due diligence to create a proper business case out of the benefits that you will drive by doing this, we have a good shot of getting leadership alignment there and then move forward on the projects.
Yeah, ultimately it's a business benefit that drives a solution, right? So, okay,
Yeah.
Going to our next point, that is lack of operational tools. See, serverless computing started picking up like I think since 2016, but adoption actually has happened only in the recent years. So, I mean, their operational tools, other different tools to manage it are still coming in, and only a few have come in right now. So I think that's the reason why there are very less tools right now on how you manage, monitor. I mean, how do you know a particular function has finished executing? All that things to manage are still coming into place right now. Already, I think a few are already in place.
Yeah. So see, the fundamental reason why you need different operational and management tools is because uh, all the developer ecosystem is used to collect, say, a debug log, recreate the event, in order to find the bug and fix it, right? Recreate the event, pick up more detailed logs on the same event, and then try and figure out the problem and fix it. Um, Unfortunately, the moment you run and code as a serverless, your opportunity to recreate the same scenario is gone, because you are never sure that this function is going to run in exact same environment in the next invocation. So whatever you cannot capture anything after the fact, and hence it has to be well thought through on how you are going to debug your distributed systems.
Testing is difficult, right? Testing is
this equally applies. Testing is difficult, so is the bug finding once it gets into the production, right? And this was anyway true for the microservices based application, given that now your single service is actually a composable microservice of about, say, 200-300 calls, and now within that you are saying few of them are going to be serverless. It will add to the complexity. Now, do we have the mature debugging and monitoring tools ready at this level? Probably not. Should that stop you from adopting functions? No. All you should be doing is being very cognizant of the fact that this is a stateless operation which will not give you an access for repeatability, and hence you need, as a developer, you need to be aware enough to ensure that you are capturing all you need about a process during the fact itself, assuming that that is your last opportunity to capture any state, right? So I think that if, as a developer, if you can inculcate that discipline, we can figure out how exactly we're going to scale the debugging and monitoring part on top of that.
Yeah, it's a matter of I mean how you learn to use it. Right now, when microservices started, everyone used to wonder the same. But now you see all companies are actually going towards the journey of microservices, or rather converting most of their monolithic applications into microservices way. So, I mean, as you start working, doing more and more, using it more and more, there are tools that will come into picture, and maybe you might be the one who might end up developing those tools for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then moving on to security, I think the serverless architecture differs a bit from the traditional architecture, and so it opens up few more areas for your function to get protected, because earlier the functions were only be able to get invoked from within application other function calls, but now you're saying they live as an independent piece of code. So every piece of function needs to get protected as if it is an independent
Yeah.
application, and I think to that extent it brings additional complexity. And if a breach occurs, to that extent, the additional skills and insights on what exactly got broken, right? So I think that's really the flavor of unique security, and I don't think we really have right now a comprehensive testing tool which can track across all
Correct.
serverless and really give you that insight. It is an evolving paradigm. That is why we are talking about it on Tech Athena. It's not a fully matured system. It is evolving, but we just wanted to highlight few of the challenges that are still there, and which you as an early adopters need to be aware
So
about.
yeah, actually, before it used to be like a one. They used to have big functions and sub functions in it. Now you break up the sub functions also, and each function has to talk to each other, has to communicate with other applications. So that's where the security comes in, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
So
yes.
yes, every day as days progress, security is also improving, and the way you think about security also is changing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, more moving parts,
Yeah.
I think the more you need to be
Yeah.
careful about. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on to the next slide, folks, right? This is really a comparison of all three leading
Serverless.
cloud offerings that are in the market for serverless. So you have from Amazon Web Services, you have Lambda. From Microsoft Azure, you have Functions, and then from Google Cloud, you have Google Cloud Functions. Maturity wise, I think Amazon was the
Earliest.
earliest, GCP was the latest. Based on which cloud provider you are adopting, you will see that they really support different
Kinds of
kinds
language.
of programming languages.
I
Yeah.
see AWS supporting maybe one or two more, or rather AWS and Azure seem to be more or less same. Uh,
I
Google
mean,
started
this is
recently.
ever changing
Yeah.
landscape. This is probably at the time when we captured, which is again about two
Correct.
months back, right?
Yeah.
So this may have already changed.
Correct. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
evolving field. It keeps on changing even before we even
Yeah.
notice it. Uh, then
Yeah. Yeah.
then different identity and access management, how each vendor deals with, but each of them has a way of dealing with it. And then persistent storage, again, each one has their own offering. Like AWS has S3, DynamoDB, and then Azure Functions has Blob, then environment variables in app services, and then Google Cloud Functions has Cloud Storage, Cloud Data Store, and Cloud SQL. Then
Yeah, so you should be aware that see the persistent storage is very interesting, because what it is trying to do is because your
detach.
functions are ephemeral and come alive. Yeah, so you can potentially use this functionality to persist the state of the function across invocations, like what I said earlier, right?
Stateless.
The functions are stateless, but you can create some sense of states by using these persistent storage, which are sort of outside the
Functions.
functions
Correct.
serverless offering. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, then you have got multiple of triggers, and I think this is something that we have not listed exhaustively. I think there are about hundreds and 150 kind of triggers that you can actually have on
Serverless platform.
each of these servers. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is what it met our eye first, so that's what we listed there. Then logging and monitoring. So each cloud vendor has their own way of logging and monitoring the serverless functions which are running. So yeah,
Hmm.
apart from that, there are third party also which you can get to monitor much more exhaustively. And then the more interesting point of serverless computing is the execution time. As you can see here, there are numbers that we have found online and where we have read the 900 seconds, 300, 600, 60 to 50, 60 to 540 seconds. But to be frank, you shouldn't be seeing what is there on the table here now. You should actually be running it and checking it, because it changes from environment to environment. It is not the same for every environment. It changes from customer to customer. So you got to really test it to see how you achieve that lowest number, right?
Yeah, and so this is you. I think from developer perspective, you should consider this as a guidance, right? You basically you are we are saying, uh, I mean, 900 second is actually a big number, but if you look at say 60-second number or 300 second, we basically say any function that realistically takes more than 5 minutes to execute is not a candidate for you to consider as serverless. This again goes back to our initial discussion, right? By design, you want something that is small in execution size to become serverless,
Hmm.
not a long running batch process or a full ETL functionality, right? So I think that's really the guidance. And if you consider it from that perspective, I think that 300 number itself becomes very
Yeah.
big. How many such atomic functionalities do you have that really need a minute of execution? We are talking about like sub-seconds and milliseconds now, right? So, I think it's just fair
Yeah.
enough.
No,
But what intrigues me is,
yeah. So
yeah,
like, and also when you say a time for anything, right? From where to where you're measuring is also important, because when you if you execute, or if you measure just for one function itself, or if you measure till it invokes the other function, the time varies, right? It's just like latency
no,
from where to where you measure.
no, no, it is only the function
Okay.
invocation time. So,
Okay.
like, you made a function call from the time it starts actually executing code. It doesn't even take into account the time it took to load the
Hmm.
code,
Okay.
right? It talks about the time from the function starts executing to the function
Hmm.
exits. Okay, but again, I mean, this can
Yeah, it
change, right?
changes
Like, for
perception
example,
to perception. It changes. Yeah.
not perception, it changes because suppose your function got loaded into a VM which has got low
Huh.
gigahertz. You will probably take higher amount of
Hmm.
time, right? Versus something that is a very fast processor.
Yeah.
So there is always going to be some way to control that in a sense, but there is no really need to walk that boundary. There would be some people and some specific cases where you will probably walk the boundary of this particular gigahertz and this kind of
Correct.
functionality. I just make the cut with say 300 seconds or something like that. But most likely you will have your functions which are tightly sitting way below these numbers, because 5 minutes is also a very big number for a function
Yeah.
execution. But what intrigues me a bit more is this concurrent executions, right? And probably we have to do a little more deep dive on this, folks. But it is more like how many simultaneous
Functions.
function calls or serverless calls can you make in your subscription? And the way I try to understand this, right, it
Hmm.
varies. uh, because I mean, I'm not clear on whether this 1,000 number on Amazon is per subscription or within a project,
Okay.
and then across project you can have these at
Hmm.
thousands versus so I think a little bit more deeper dive on exact what this concurrent execution means. Is it applied at overall your subscription level? Is it applied at you as a customer as a tenant level, or it is within the
Hmm.
project? Whether it is applied as that function not more than 1,000, but if you have multiple functions then
Each
each
function
function can
now.
be concurrently running 1,000. Yeah, I think that kind of clarity we need to bring in, but I couldn't really spend time, neither did Dipti
Yeah.
probably, to
So,
get
so
to that
I mean, when
exact.
we read online, when I saw it, I actually saw it as per subscription, but I did not see again per resource group, or per tenant
Nice.
level. I did not say tenant level how many options are there. So, but each one has their own
Mhm.
offering. But yeah, I mean, right now, currently, to be frank, is anyone running 1,000 functions at a time? So that's a question.
I
I
mean,
mean,
even see, once you start to adopt,
yeah,
you will quickly get to that scale. I don't think getting to 1,000 is a big deal because it is just a function
correct.
call, right?
Yeah,
If you have got 50,000 customers logging onto your system, and if your order update is a serverless, then you'll probably hit 1,000 functions on order update in no time.
yeah,
So it depends, and that is why knowing exactly where the limit is very important. Is it on that function, or is it overall at your subscription, which basically means that you have 10 functions. Then if you average out your 1,000 numbers, then you can't invoke each function at more than 1,000 times concurrently
hmm,
at the given time,
correct.
right? So is why it is very important for us to have that information. Unfortunately, we couldn't go through. So at this stage, I would say Azure Functions looks at an advantage because there is no limit listed here. So you don't have to worry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And
The last point is
moving on.
orchestration.
Yeah.
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 So AWS has step functions, then Azure has Azure Logic Apps. Orchestration is something which is built to run this whole serverless computing. Then just talking about the particular function, or rather you take a function, go and run it. So and Google has Google Cloud Data Flow. So there are three offerings from three prime serverless vendors in the market currently.
Okay.
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 So
All right.
let's move on to the next slide.
Yeah.
Okay. So here we are. What we have put together here is a different platforms which are currently available for serverless computing, then enablers of serverless computing. Like previously I told, right, we spoke about what tools are there in the market right now, very less tools. So I know there are a lot more, but these are the ones which are noticeable right now, which I have put together. And I have kept together the Fortune 500 users right now. Not all, there are a lot, I know. Banking is completely missing there, but there are banking customers also here using it. But I picked up examples from Fortune 500. So platforms apart from Azure, Google and Amazon, you will see Oracle, then Iron.io. They are small vendors and they are big vendors as well. So each one is offering different things. So it's all up to you what you want to try and use, and who do you trust the most, right?
Okay. So good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And good information on this chart, Deepthi. And I think, based on what we just discussed, whoever are trying to explore and get started on serverless, um, folks, this is a slide to go to and understand. Maybe try and understand the case studies with Fortune 500, and then get different development platforms, figure out what you are comfortable with, and choose a stack. I'm sure once you get mastery in a stack, then going across the different stacks should not be a problem. And eventually, these things tend to get standardized. Uh, I would definitely encourage you to start looking at Microsoft Azure Functions as your first step. But yeah, really, the decision is up to you.
Yeah, we experienced it, we tested it, we saw that.
Yeah.
So from our experience, we are telling that.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Okay, all right.
Laka, let's go on to the
And with that,
next slide. So guys, we don't really have any Q&A right now, but please do reach out to us. You can actually send mails to techathena@gmail.com, or you can also ask questions in the comment section below of our YouTube channel. And do subscribe. For those of you who want to a notification whenever we post a video, please subscribe and click on the bell button. Then you'll get a notification whenever we post a video.
okay, so folks, thank you very much for listening in, and thank you very much for your time today to go through this video. And now, as is our ritual, let us go back to the interesting book that I am reading right now. Deepthi, do you want to bring up the picture?
We're going there. Oh, here, Laka. This is the
Yeah.
book.
So I am right now reading the book called The Story of Philosophy by Will Durant, and it's an amazing book. It takes you through the history of philosophy, starting right from the first philosopher who was Socrates, to Plato, to Aristotle, coming to the recent age, etc. Right, so Voltaire, and it captures the main thoughts of each of those philosophers, the socio-economic paradigm in those times, and then how the economic changes, the civilization changes have impacted the way the philosophers think.
Okay.
But what really intrigued me was the fact that philosophy started as a scientific profession. Earlier days, the science, the philosophy, and the spirituality, right? Those were integrated branches. Most of the philosophers, early philosophers, were scientists as well. And somehow we have taken that break in our journey, in the progression of philosophy, and now philosophy is more like humanity and political science and completely detached from modern science, right? We don't tend to think of philosophy as a scientific stream
Correct.
anymore. But when right now when I'm reading the book, I think that is probably the right approach, because it can keep us very grounded on how we are prioritizing some of the scientific and technical research, and what use cases are we picking up,
Okay.
etc. So yeah, that's my
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
that's my thought.
this gives me a
But an interesting.
different perspective. I had been reading mostly technical books or finance books, but yeah, I always find philosophy boring. But now a different angle to technology, then I would want to read it.
Sure.
Okay, then.
Okay,
Yeah,
so with that, let us end our session
yeah.
with for
Thank
today.
you, guys. Thank you for your
Uh,
time.
yeah, and then keep
And
watching
yeah, and we'll do
Tekathena.
keep post. Yeah, we'll be a bit late and all because of the internet issues, but yes, we will be there. We'll be posting all different interesting sessions, and we have a kind of lined up a few interesting topics. So soon you'll see us with more. Thanks, guys.
Bye bye.